Good evening. I'd like to call this joint study session of the University City Council and the Loop Special Business District Board meeting to order. As we begin the meeting, Gregory, do you have any changes or any members of council to the agenda this evening?
Honorable Mayor, I have one change I'd like to propose. That's moving consent item number 2 as the first item up under the city manager's report.
Okay. Any member of council have a change?
Yes.
Okay.
Mayor Crow, I would like to add under council reports and business as under discussion, simply add a quick discussion about District Athletic Commission. That's all. And I'd like to add that to the discussion. I'd like to also have it before we have the U City Resources and WashU discussion, simply because I want to get this out of the way. And
What is it? What is the item again?
District Athletic Commission. That's the commission between the school district and U City, the Athletic Commission.
But there's no vote to be taken.
No, nothing like that at all. Just kind of get your direction and where we stand with that, because Liquor was the council liaison for that.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Hearing none, we'll move forward. Gregory, you want to move forward with LSBD?
Honorable Mayor and council members and the LSBD board, I appreciate having the opportunity to present to you tonight. I want to first start out by introducing our new economic development director and assistant to the city manager, Libby Tucker. Libby, I think, is in her 3rd week with us. 6th week? Oh, God, time flies, right? But doing a great job for us. And the reason Libby is important is because she is the liaison to the Loop Special Business District Board, and so she will be having quite a bit of contact with you. I believe everyone knows the boundaries for the Loop Special Business District. Primarily, it's the property that's located within the Loop, abutting on both sides of Delmar, as well as Kingsland, Enright, Leland, Melville, Westgate, and Delmar. The revenues that can cover the Loop's all costs and expenses incurred for operation of the district, as according to our code here. The revenues are reflective of a 50% additional cost for business license for those businesses operating in the Loop, 0.85% of $100 of assessed valuation. Also, there is no abatement of property taxes for the Loop. The Loop has the ability to bond and use the proceeds or revenues that is derived within the Loop for that purpose, so it can incur debt. The mayor and council have is responsible for the budget for the Loop, but that's with a recommendation from the advisory commission. So the Loop Special Business District. It is a 9-membership commission. The term in office, I think most of you understand, is 3 years. Dismissal for any sort of misconduct, vacancies for the membership, and vacancies, the mayor makes the appointment with the approval of the council. There's no compensation, and you cannot have conflicts of interest. Primarily, the Loop can't employ any of its relatives. Anyone on the commission that would have a relative. The duties of the commission, there are 3 officers in particular: the chairman, the vice chairman, and the treasurer make up the executive committee for the LSBD. It can create bylaws for administrative purposes so long as they do not conflict with state statutes or our city codes. It is intended to develop a development plan that primarily acts as a strategic plan for the loop. So what is the vision? Also, it creates a budget that is submitted to the mayor and council for approval, a line item budget. It's responsible for creating an annual report of the activities that are in line with the plan, and it is a public body, so all of the meetings are open to the public. As I go through this, if you have questions or comments, please don't hesitate to stop me. But I'm going to go through this pretty...
Has the LSBD ever issued, I'm just curious if they ever issued, we've never done bonds, right, ever? You said one of the authorities was that we could have debt. I don't recall. I just, okay, thank you. I didn't think so.
I wanted to just briefly highlight some of the allowable improvements and activities. You're actually able to close streets and alleys, construct improvement, landscaping, provide special police or cleaning personnel and facilities, street alley maintenance, purchase, operate minibus or buses.
I'm sorry, that minibus thing was put in years ago in 1980 in case we could attract varsity students there when the loop was really down and out. That was one of the things people talked about, like, well, what if we did have a circulator? That's the only reason that was in there.
For municipal services, it really talks about planning funds and that the city would not supplant funds when this started, so it wouldn't reduce the level of services that was already in existence. The core purpose for this briefing is really to get some discussion and direction on four areas. The first is that it is the council's expectation that, and consistent with the city codes, that a line item budget would be provided. So perhaps more detailed than what's been provided in the past. Also, our code requires a strategic plan, so something that ties the budget into an overall strategy for the loop. Another item is, does the loop need its own executive director? As I've indicated, that Libby Tucker will be the liaison to the board, but there will still need to be someone that's actually doing the work. By that I mean putting the plan together, making sure that the proposed budget is in order, and so forth. The fourth item is, what should our partnership with the East Loop include? Whether there is willingness to partner with the East Loop, and if so, up under what conditions. So those are the things I think. A couple of them we don't have any choices in. I think that the code requires a line item budget. The code also requires that you create a strategic plan. But regarding the need for an executive director and what should our partnership with the East Loop include?
To the members of the LSBD, candidly, do you have I know enough about it to say I don't know that you have the personnel resources to do a line item budget and a strategic plan. Am I in the right direction on that?
See,
Yes.
I think it would really help to have an executive director, as we do right at the moment, especially as all the volunteer people and hours that we put in kind of fade away a little bit. As far as the line item budget, we definitely have the capability. We've submitted for years a line item budget that the finance director has put into pretty general categories, which are actually a little more difficult to read than our line item budget proposals. We're working on a line item budget right now, and it should be finalized over the next couple of weeks, I think.
Okay. And the strategic plan issue?
Yeah, the strategic plan is new information to us as of this meeting, but I think depending on the level of detail, and we'll ask for your direction on what you want from that, but, you know, we have pretty committed volunteers that can get something like that put together, short of it being like a 100-page document, which I don't think is what you'd be asking for.
I was just going to say, a strategic plan that I'm at least used to, normally the individual that's facilitating the creation of it reaches out to all of the stakeholders to get their thoughts regarding what should be the vision for the loop. And then that is vetted through, I would suspect, the Loop Special Business District to refine that, ultimately with the mayor and council making a decision on what the strategy should be.
With $80,000 a year, and not mentioning at the same time that any planning we've done is always married up with requests and the receipt of money from the 1/4 cent sales tax fund of money, the ERTS money. So any planning we're doing incorporates our overall thinking about what we need for the street. And there are two pots of money that have been put together. I believe our requests to the ERTS board have always shown what we have on hand and what we can devote from the LSBD pot of money. So for as long as the ERTS funding has existed, we've functioned in that way. I think Dan Wald's here, when he was treasurer and he was putting together a budget, it always saw both as, while they're separate, they address the needs of the West Loop. So if you take ERTS money and the money we're collecting, you may have enough for an executive director.
Right. I think for the executive director, this is just something that you might consider. I believe when I was here before, they had a person that was in that role, the Loop Special Business District did. And that individual, I can't recall her name at this point, but that individual was responsible for maintaining the plan, putting the budget together, and putting together the annual report. I just cannot think of her name off.
Jessica.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes, that's it.
But then, to attract somebody of her caliber, you almost eat up the entirety of your $80,000 in annual receipts.
Yeah, we had her, I believe she was officially working 20 hours a week and was putting in more effort than that, I believe. And we found that it just wasn't, the compensation wasn't enough for what we were asking her. And we, so that's why we tried to move to a full executive director position, because what we had was, she was the marketing director, is what the official title was at the time, and we had her doing an executive director job, but it was asking a lot more than what her original job title was.
Right. I'm certainly not recommending that you hire an executive director. I think that that's one option. If the board has the ability to, on a volunteer basis, to put these things together, the strategic plan, the annual plan, as well as, I think there is one other, the budget, then I would say, yeah, an executive director would not be needed. I believe that in the future, you will see us take a much more active role, us being the city, now that we have an economic development person on board, in that role for the entire city, but certainly a part of that is the Loop Special Business District.
Also, just want to note that our current executive director has met with all the stakeholders and all the business owners up and down the street when she came on in the fall. So in terms of tying in the stakeholders, that is something that Rochelle has already done. And then she is also working working on a general strategic plan, but we would tailor one more specifically to have her tailor one more specifically to what you're asking about now.
So could someone from the LSBD detail, as you mentioned, Rochelle Lequier is functioning part-time as the executive director. I think it's 40% of the time, is that correct? And so could you cover essentially her duties and what you are paying for that?
Her time is approximately 1/3 in the West Loop and 2/3 in the East Loop. Her duties overlap for both when it comes to special events and promotions. They're singular if it comes to certain economic, or I should say real estate development in the East Loop, and they're very separated. We've been very cognizant of that fact. The times that it really makes sense to have a person of her caliber, and you might not have known her history and all that, but she spent 13 years in Maplewood and really helped bring that back till it was 100% occupancy. So one of her biggest challenges by us is for her to get tenants, both east and west, and so she has different real estate brokers, roundtables, and tours she's setting up right now for the Loop, where they can actually walk through the various unoccupied spaces. She's doing a lot in that regard. The other part that's really, really important is that she organizes and oversees the special events, whether it's the every first Friday of the month type of event like Get Looped, or special events in June, Loop Ice Carnival, the holiday events and all. Something that we as volunteers can't really monitor on the way that we used to be able to as far as time goes when things were smaller. So she's super valuable in that regard, I think. And the fact that we're going to extremes to make sure that it's separate, what time is spent in the West Loop, what time is spent in the East Loop, and what, every aspect of it if totally separate. So it'll adhere to all the regulations.
So my question of the LSBD would be, do you need someone who's 1/3 time, or do you need someone who's more than that for the kind of things that you want to have happen? In the East Loop, we're separating out the two. So as you know, there's been some retraction. I'll call it a retraction of the West Loop. And so so my concern is that maybe you need someone who's more dedicated. If you feel 1/3 is adequate, I'd like to know that as well.
So I think it's important to note that when Jessica Bueller was in this position, she also was paid by the East Loop and the West Loop SBD, and was able to work for both sides and cover the overlap in that position as well. At this point, our board has voted unanimously to hire her when that came on in the past, and her track record has shown that she has a large appetite to take on very substantial projects. And right now, I can only speak for myself, but I believe, and I haven't heard any rumblings from other board members that they don't believe she is up to the job or is handling poorly at this time.
I wasn't questioning her ability. I was questioning the allocation of time.
Yes, I think the
Yes.
allocation of time is adequate for what we've hired her to do.
For the West Loop. Okay.
Yes.
Terry, I think Steve wants to.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree.
And you weren't on the board when we voted, so obviously I wasn't saying that you voted for her to be hired for this.
Well, if you think things are all right, okay, and we're getting 1/3 of this individual's time and 2/3 of it is being spent in the city, I would suggest to you that we may need somebody full-time. When Jessica was working for both East and West, U City was paying 2/3 of her salary, I believe, and the city side of the east side was paying 1/3. I can't remember how she was allocating her time. Maybe it was 50-50, maybe it was 2/3, 1/3, but as a property owner in the West and as a board member, and I wasn't on the board, I'm not questioning what you did, the question in front of us is, do we need a full-time person? And I would say yes. We don't have the resources for a full-time person. At one point in time, the East didn't have the resources to even, in a timely way, address their sharing of, a marketing executive director type. What's being, and we've known this for some time, and we've been talking, property owners have, about a self-assessment and a SID to increase the amount of money that's available to address the need for somebody working full-time to have a marketing plan, to have a strategic plan, and other things. But full-time isn't the only thing we need money for. We realize $80,000 is not a small sum of money. That's the LSBD take in a given year. And what we've been allocated from the ERTS board is not small, but it still combined isn't enough to really underwrite an executive director and have a full-time, fulsome marketing effort.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. When it comes to the allocation of time and the division of labor of the executive director that we have currently, I would just note that, as Ryan pointed out, the previous director's expectation of hours was 20 hours a week, and whether that was 50-50, meaning 10 hours for the West and 10 hours for the East, or 2/3, 1/3, which would be roughly 13.5 hours and 6.5 hours. Currently, the executive director is working 40 to 50 hours a week, and a third of, let's call it 45 hours, is 15 hours, if she's putting a third of that time into the West Loop. So the hour allocation is a better split for us currently, just on the math lines of it. If we're talking about what is a better arrangement and all for what we did previously and what we're doing now.
I think the question is, does this entity have the resources, the horsepower, to get the job we need done in 2019, 2020? Now, it was created a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I'm not questioning how we've tried to piece an arrangement together that'll help us get the limited job done that's being done. And I think it's limited. It doesn't have anything to do with our capabilities. It's a resourcing issue.
I think the biggest issue isn't could we use somebody full-time, because I think the answer is yes. If we could have somebody full-time and afford it, we had somebody working full-time just for the West Loop for U-City, I think that would be great. The problem is the budget, and if we have the money to spend to hire a quality candidate to do it, I think we should. The reason we went with what we're doing now with the split is because we didn't feel we could fit an appropriate salary for an individual's full-time on just the U-City Loop to make it worthwhile, and so working together with the East Loop seemed like a prudent thing at the time. If we can get more money to do it, I think having a full-time for us and full-time there that can work together is an optimal solution.
I think also the fact that we have Rochelle Lequier working now, and we also have Libby Tucker and others at City Hall working not full-time only to the Loop, but for this part of U-City is very important, and that really balances things out. I don't think we can lose the perspective of how important it is for us to, when we're promoting the Del Mar Loop in general, to include East and West together as we go up against other communities in our area, whether it's all the stuff that's happening and will happen in Cortex, or if it's happening downtown or in Grand Center. The competition is really stiff, and it should be. It's great for St. Louis. St. Louis is really having a big upswing right now in general, but they have huge amounts of hundreds of millions of dollars going into those areas right now, and for us to be able to put out the same brochure that shows all the amenities we have here to get the benefits of having all, the pageant being the #4 club level in the world the 2,000, 3,000 capacity on down in the world is really meaningful to our image around the country, around the Midwest, and as far as St. Louis goes. The same with Del Mar Hall being 54, which is amazing. All that works together for the benefit of both U-City and the city. It wasn't us that, we weren't the ones who decided to have this artificial city-county border. That was done, you know, in what, 1880s or whatever it was. And it's hurt us in St. Louis having that. We bridged that here. And for us to join together and be listed in the official St. Louis Visitors Guide and pool our resources and our energies to putting in the full 3 pages that we do every year, in the same way with the pocket guide, that's 300,000 of these are in every hotel room in St. Louis and given out to companies around the country as well as visitor centers. Out of this 96 pages this year that just came out in January, Loop businesses or parts of the Loop are mentioned or featured big time on 29 pages out of 96. That wouldn't happen if we wouldn't pool our
Joe,
resources.
excuse
and
me.
the same with this guide. The fact that we have 22 listings in there where Laclede's Landing has 7, Grand Center 3, Soulard 17, Lafayette Square 5. We get all that because we're joined together. And like if you go out of town and you say you're from St. Louis rather than saying you're from, I don't know, Ellisville, that's how meaningful this is.
Yeah. Joe, we're actually here talking about the West, so I understand the pitch here. But of those 29 pages or whatever, how many of them are businesses in the West? That's a question I have, because there's an investment that the city is making, not just you, but the city is actually making into our Loop. And so we need to keep that in mind.
And
let me finish. So when we're looking at this problem and we're looking at and there have been problems, and right now there's a retraction problem, a business retraction problem. So if we're looking at something like that, I want to think about how we can reverse it. And if we're only featuring the pageant, you're not solving our problem here. So, and if the pictures that come out are only on the east side, you're hurting us. So I'm telling you that for me there are some issues, and while there is a benefit to partnership, I do not want to see an overlay district. My colleagues may feel differently, but I want to be very clear. How many of those 29 pages feature businesses on the west? How many feature businesses on the east?
Well, I distribute those to you and the rest of the council if they want them every year, and you can get them any place and count them up. I could count them up, not right now, but I can count them up and let you know. All I know is that the U-City calendar has featured the pageant and the Moonrise Hotel in its own calendar because it was beneficial to the image of their calendar.
No, I don't think so.
Well,
We
that
don't
happened,
get,
Paulette.
we don't, our calendar?
Yeah.
Our calendar pictures
A
are
couple of
just-
years ago,
Joe, excuse me, our calendar photographs are selected by the Arts and Letters Commission, not by this council and not by anything else. And it can be pictures nationwide or, with this area. I understand you own the pageant. You own the pageant. I understand what the city is doing. I understand the 122 TIFs. I'm talking about the health of this particular part of the street and what we can do to improve it, and how the board that we approve of will work to make that happen. So in a sense, I'm asking, what do you actually need to make it happen? And in another sense, I'm saying that you have not been following the code for a long time, and we have a problem here with some money that was spent, some $8,000 that was spent for marketing that we haven't seen anything from. And I have been copied on many of those emails, so you know that the question still hangs out there. How did that happen without the approval of the council? And did the people who donated that money even know about it? I don't need an answer here. I need us to focus on regaining the vibrancy and the health of the west side. That's our focus.
and that's our goal too. And if you think otherwise, then you're wrong. If you look at the last invoice that I sent out last fall for this guide, I broke it down by how many businesses participated in those ads and how many didn't. So you can get the exact breakdown, east and west, that way, and we're doing that.
Honorable Mayor and council members and the board, one of the options, I think part of the process is to identify those activities that the Loop Special Business District is going to be working on over the period of the next year. It sounds as though there needs to be at least a better understanding at the council level as to what the marketing strategy for the Loop is going to be. And so that is something, an activity that the Loop Special Business District can work on along with Libby and bring that to the City Council for formal action that says, here is how we want you to market the Loop. Does that sound reasonable?
Thank you, Mayor. My question has to do with the Executive Director, Rachel Lequier's current position, and I want to know how we can be guaranteed that there is not a conflict of interest. So the LSBD pays 1/3 of her salary, but the East Loop CID pays 2/3 of her salary. So if she is supposed to, if for instance, if she had someone come to her and said, I would like to locate a business in the area, how are we sure that we're getting our money's worth, that she's representing us and she's not representing the city of St. Louis? I think that there's a conflict there that I haven't been able to settle within myself. As Councilmember Carr has said, that we are concerned with what happens in the University City portion of the Loop, and I would like to know how we can be assured that there's not a conflict of interest here when it comes to what her time is that she spends on doing specifically for our area, and making sure that she is dedicated to the area, because again, 2/3 of her salary is coming from the East Loop portion. So while I have no reason to doubt that where her allegiance might be in terms of her doing the right thing, what guarantees do we have that we are getting our money's worth?
I think a lot of what she does in the East Loop is even the far, far East Loop, such as helping to coordinate the parking lot that was built in the 5800 block of Del Mar, that type of thing, which would have nothing to do with this here. That's why she was paid more on that side. When you have a broker's roundtable type of thing, of real estate brokers, it's probably best to put all the spaces out that are available, office space, retail space, and have tours. And she's going to tour them both in the West and East Loop. She's going to tour, and then they pick, if they want to come into the Loop, they pick what spaces they want. It's much more efficient and much more impactful having the whole area represented that way. The same way representing a special event is more impactful having it the whole way as far as the media goes and all, both East and West. If you have any suggestions on how you want it broken down as far as billing and all that kind of stuff, or hours kept, I can ask her to look into that. But the dedication is very strong and very all-encompassing.
Actually, I would like to see that. I would like to see if we can get some type of documentation to show the amount of time that she is spending working for the businesses in the university side of the Loop, just so that we're sure that we're getting our money's worth.
Yeah, I think that's a totally valid concern. It's something that we've talked with her about, and that's the direction and the condition of her being hired, is that there's adequate resources and time dedicated appropriately to each side. Over and above that, we've been talking and had some stalls getting some information from the city about retaining the services of an accounting firm that would do the accounting for the East Loop and the West Loop Special Business District. So we would have very clear breakdown of the finances and how everything is split and paid for and allocated that way. But I've been asking for some information regarding how to go about the public process of hiring somebody, and I haven't got an answer back yet. But that is another way that we want to add extra assurances that we're doing this appropriately.
Thank you. I actually just want to come back to something Mr. Stone said, and I'm somebody who's paid attention for a very long time, and I've heard about a great deal about the regionalism of the Loop. And what I've seen over the last 10 years is a growing and increased focus on the east side. And that's where the investment seems to be. That's where the buildings are going up. And it does not sit well with me that a third of the resources are being dedicated here when I think the greater need right now is here in terms of an executive director, in terms of marketing resources, in terms of all of the above. And as Ms. Carr said, I'm here most interested in filling the spaces that we have empty in our part of the loop. I'm less concerned with the other side. Yes, I want it all to be great, but I think there needs to be much more focus here because I do see a lot of promotion of what's east of here.
Well, real quick, I don't think anybody disagrees with you to the contrary. Ryan fully supported that. I think if we had more resources, we would do that, but you just can't hire an executive, and Steve Stone said the same thing. You just can't hire an executive director of any value for $40,000 a year. I don't know if you can hire anybody for that value. So
No, I understand that. And just to clarify, I'm not questioning, the direction that the board took. These are just my observations, sitting here right now and having gone through all of this and having watched what's happened over the last number of years. And as Councilmember Carr said, the retraction or the number of vacant spaces we have, really, as far as where I'm sitting, is the thing I'm most concerned about and focused on.
I think we're all very concerned about it. And one thing to point out, a lot of the construction that's happened east of Limit is private people going in and doing it, whether it's Pace Properties that they're building the new 3-story building at the corner of Delmar and Skinker, which, by the way, has increased our security in a positive way, in a huge way, by having the gas station gone. Hundreds of kids can't gather there and, do their fights and all that, the same way the church's chicken thing. Hopefully that'll get built out too. But those are private people, and the land was there. It was if there was land in the western part of the Delmar Loop that you can provide for developers, I'm sure they would be happy to come in. If you could put 2 or 3 lesser buildings together or lesser or open spaces and say, hey, we have this package for you. I mean, kind of like you're doing on Olive in a way, but it's a smaller way here because it's only 2 blocks or 3, whatever. I think we all want it to happen. But I think we should also be very grateful that these people are putting in, and not just me, but other people are putting in huge amounts of money to develop over there, which makes the U City part of the loop much safer in its own in its own regard.
Mr. Stone may have been ahead of me, and then Ms. Carr as well.
I've already spoken to you, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. First of all, forgive my tardiness. Second, I want to get back to this idea of a strategic plan, because while I'm not naive enough to believe that a strategic plan is a cure-all, I think it could provide some direction and some concrete steps to address some of the issues that my colleagues are bringing up. So let me double-click on that a moment. The mayor brought up resources, or perhaps lack thereof, to put together a strategic plan. Those who have been through that process before understand a good one is not a cheap one and is comprehensive. So can you talk about ideas, given they may be off the top of your head, because I understand you may have just understood that that's a requirement tonight. So, but off the top of your head, is that something you can begin to work on and put together that, again, might address some of these larger concerns?
One of the best ideas that we're working on right now, Steve Stone had brought it up a couple of years ago, and he and I have talked about it, and now both boards have passed a small amount of money for an initial study on lighting, not just lighting for safety, which we did years ago in the loop when we first formed the LSBD, but just lighting to make the street more interesting, more exciting, more vibrant, and all, and that can benefit everybody in that regard. So that's one of the things we could put in a written strategic plan, but that's being worked on right now. And it's a great idea, I think, to at least look at it.
I'd also like to point out $80,000 was the number used for what the business licenses and fee and taxes are. I think it's been closer to 72, but please feel free to correct me on that. I bring that up only to say the $72,000 to $80,000 that we are guaranteed through those two mechanisms to the board is pretty small, and that's eaten up rather quickly. And then the large majority, or the majority of our funding comes from the EDRST funds. And what's difficult, and I understand the need and the idea behind the strategic plan, but given that that money is only allocated on a yearly basis and we have no guarantee that we could put together a and maybe there's a way to do this, but my limited understanding is every year we apply for these funds and every year they get voted up or get voted down at the council's discretion. If there was a way to set up a 5-year plan that was guaranteed to have $100,000 each year and things like that. Does it say that up there?
You know, I'm saying, I think a strategic plan could help sell something that was a little more reliable, okay?
Sure.
In terms of, and if we have a comprehensive festival lighting approach, it's not going to be cheap, okay? And we're going to need commitments that are longer term than a year from the ERC's board.
Is that something that the EDRST board can do, is do multiple year commitments to larger projects?
But I think that if the mayor and council indicated, it's sort of like our 5-year capital improvement program. It gives an indication of the overall direction that the mayor and council are headed with any particular project. And so even though a project may take multiple years, the funding might be allocated in 1 year, but it is used over a period of time. So I think the first key issue is what is it that you want to achieve, even if achieving that is going to occur over a 5-year period.
I don't know that I can necessarily, that we can verbalize right now an overall plan, but I do think that the board members and the merchants in the loop as a whole have an idea of what we'd like to see, even if I'm not able to make a point by point. And I don't know what exactly is required from a formal strategic plan, but I do think that us putting that together will be helpful for us to keep an eye on what we really want to achieve instead of getting distracted by smaller things. So I think that, I don't know what resources are needed to really do it right, but I do think it's a good plan, and not because we lack a plan, but because formalizing it will strengthen what we want to do.
So I'd like to to differentiate, as the city manager has done, between a strategic plan and a budget. So a strategic plan is what you would like to do or see for yourselves. And that is not necessarily constrained by money at the time that you put it together. So you may have this plan, as we do, that lasts 10 years. And that directs the budgeting. At some point you say, well, we did want to put up those lights, so we clearly have to budget for them in this year. So they're two very different animals. Okay, so I think, I do think that Ryan has pretty much verbalized, what this is. So it's a looking forward. It's a not, oh, we're stuck because of the construction, or oh, we can't do this. It's something that you would like to see. What would you like to see the loop, the University City side of the loop, look like in 5 years? And then using your budget to actualize that. And the second thing has nothing to do with that. You mentioned an accounting firm, and you know that I've been there at those meetings. It appears to me that you're going in the direction, and I've asked you to put that out for bid, to do that process, which you've agreed to do. But it seems to me that having an accounting firm that represents both sides, again, raises the question of conflict of interest. It's a question. It's not otherwise. We are unique. We are unique. And by that, I don't mean special. I mean just different. There are two entities here. There's plenty of room for partnership, I mean, that's certainly not being excluded. But for, you know, for whatever it is, because this organization is a governmental organization, and the SID on the east side, I don't believe you've formally gotten rid of your SBD, but I think, yeah, you voted that down?
It was dissolved.
It was?
It took a couple of years, but it was
Okay.
formally dissolved.
All right, so your SID on the east side is actually just a not-for-profit. So there, again, two very different animals, two very different kinds of demands. So it's not that I'm being arbitrary and stomping my foot and saying anything. There are criteria that we have to meet. Business districts are often looked at by the auditor. And so, you know, what we're saying is before we get into that position, let's kind of clean this up here, as well as, I think, focus on a strategic plan. And if that strategic plan includes the partnership with the east side, that's great too, but that's the dreaming, and that dreaming results in a direction in which you'll be heading from now until whenever. And it can change over years too. If you reevaluate it every 3 years or 2 years or something like that, then you can accommodate for changes in what you see, changes in the market, all kinds of things.
Mr. Stone.
Yeah, I'm sort of struck by something Jeff was saying, and Mr. Hales, and I don't think that if something good happens in the East, it necessarily is conferring some benefit in the West, and vice versa. And while there may be value in creating the impression that there's a joint continuum of entertainment, I think I'm interested in maintaining a degree of independence and seeking out those areas where we can collaborate, where efficiencies can be achieved, where joint marketing can take place. But I'm interested in this side. I've been on this side for a long time and invested in U City. I'm uncomfortable being dependent, on another entity that sits across a dividing line and assuming that we're taking care of in getting our business done here. I think the taxes you collect here depend upon leases being entered into here and maintaining property values. And while I don't believe the East is doing anything that's interrupting or interfering with that upside, I think we've got to, while we're partnering, pay attention to what's happening here and how our interests are being taken care of. I'm interested in that, okay? I don't have enough time to worry about what's going on across Skinker, okay? And I think Paulette makes a point. There's a responsibility, a board responsibility to take care of the business here. And I know everybody is honestly trying to balance this allocation of time and resources, but I think, and I've been talking to various council people and property owners for some time, we've got to bring some resources to bear here so that we don't lose our independence.
Mr. Cusick.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Edwards, I have a comment to make, and I want to follow up with you said when I asked about a conflict of interest that could or potentially exist for the executive director, and you used the example that there would be just a pool of property that would be shown. I'm not comfortable with that answer, but I don't know what the answer is that I'm looking for. But I'd just like to point out that an executive director that would have an attitude that was not 100% as positive for one side of the area as another could have some bearing and some influence on any potential businesses that might want to relocate. So I still think that there could be a conflict of interest with an executive director that is supposed to be representing two different areas, and I would like to see those areas kept separate. And to that end, I'd like to bring up a process issue that I think needs to be addressed. And when you hold the LSBD meetings, it's always, the agendas and the meetings always contain the information for the East Loop CID, and I think that those should be separate, that there should be a clear demarcation that this is the LSBD for University City, and to have the East Loop CID from the City of St. Louis information on the same agenda item and in the minutes may be not clear enough. And would you consider separating those and removing those from those agendas and minutes?
I'm confused by your comment about the meetings, because the first group, first of all, there's the overall report by the executive director for the area in general. Then the U-City section comes up next. And then the East Loop section comes up, and those are separate reports. And this is just a general meeting, not board meetings. The West Loop board meeting is held after that meeting, and that's only West Loop. The East Loop has its own board meetings at a separate time, separate place. So I'm not sure where the conflict is there at all. As far as the accounting, potential same firm being an accounting firm, we pay, I think, $600 a year to U-City or some auditor to audit our books, at least we have in the past. And so even if there are savings to be had by having the same firm, I'm not saying it'll be chosen that way. If it's a better separation, I'm fine with it. But I think there are cost savings to be had by having the same firm, because I have all the same numbers and they can get it out a little bit faster. And then the audit can show whether or not something's going wrong. But if it turns out to be two separate accounting firms, I'm fine with it. But as far as conflict the other way, I just don't understand. I still am not quite sure what you meant.
I think that you use the example that the executive director would be showing properties in the East Loop and then the West Loop, the University City side, and that it would be a rather neutral decision for any type of potential businesses that would want to locate in that area. But I think the attitude of an executive director would, when you have someone that would want to locate in one side or the other, what the attitude would be of this executive director to steer one business more favorably in one direction or the other. And that's my concern, is that the person that is going to be developing businesses or speaking with potential businesses to come into University City, that they have our back, or we have their back 100%, that they are going to be wanting to put it all out there, that you need to be in the Del Mar Loop area in University City, and not giving them an option of, oh, well, here, you can go here, you can go here. But I would like to hear that an executive director is out there batting for us.
I think she is, and the goal of having these tours and meetings is to just put it out there, and then put the building owners or their representatives in contact with the potential tenants. And the fact that U-City now has an economic development person, that person could be part of this whole thing and really steer it that way. I mean, there's, if you have any other suggestion on that, I really don't know.
Out of curiosity, are you asking that we have clearly our own executive director, or if we came to an agreement with the East Loop for it to be a 50-50 instead of a 1/3, 2/3 split on her both her pay and expectations for what she's working for, would that be something that would be acceptable to you?
I would like to, of course, as everyone has said, is have our own executive director and someone working with Libby, so that they're out there 100% of the time, 5 days a week, pushing for University City. But I see how impractical that may be in terms of not having the funds available to hire a full-time executive director for the Loop. My concern is that an executive director that is representing both sides of the area, I still see that is a conflict of interest. And I don't know how to get over that if 50% of the salary or 30% of the salary is being paid by one section versus the other. I don't know what the answer is, but I just have those concerns.
So the salary percentage isn't a factor for you, or a significant factor? You just keep bringing it up, so I'm just trying to clarify.
if their funds were available to pay for a full-time executive director, yes, I would agree to that. My concern is that the executive director, who does that executive director answer to?
The executive director is supposed to answer to both boards.
And I see that as a conflict.
And so it
And I
doesn't
don't know how it
matter
could be
that she's being
resolved.
paid 2/3 by them and 1/3 by us. It's that she's reporting to both.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just curious because you keep repeating that 1/3, 2/3, and if it's not relevant that it's a different amount, then I don't know why we're bringing that up. I would like to point out that for the past several years, we've been asked by the council to consider investments in Olive to also help us. Lifting, rising tide lifts all boats, I've heard said. But at the same time, as a small business owner and resident of the Loop, I see, while I do think that Olive doing well does help us, I also think that the East Loop doing well does help us. Obviously, there are some situations where them doing well can, it's a complicated situation, and so it shouldn't be dismissed that sometimes when something happens there, it means it's not happening here. But at the same time, knowing that there are people coming to the pageant isn't irrelevant. It does help the small businesses in the Loop, in the U-City Loop, just as stuff happening on Olive and investments in Olive helps us.
Thank you. In the interest of time, Mr. McMahon.
And I'll try to be brief, but
Do you have something to say?
I'm just gonna summarize.
it seems to me that there is a fairly decent consensus that if the funds were there, the setup that we have now would not be what we have. But the setup we have now with the expenditures is not out of design as much. Councilman Carr was talking about the strategic plan as a kind of like my wedding registry. Gee, I'll put down a lot of things and I hope they'll all be bought, but maybe they won't. It's a wish list. So we're not doing our wish list isn't what we have now, but so it's out of necessity of what we have now. And that's how the funds are being distributed. But it's really not what I think. What I'm hearing is if we had the right amount of money, that wouldn't be what we would do. So by necessity, we've done something else. And by necessity, then that waters down the advocacy for this side. Not to say that, and I'll back off the conflict of interest, but when someone's advocating for one side or the other, they put that to the forefront. And if by necessity we had to kind of create a conglomeration of sides, then what we're advocating for is a different area. And it may benefit both sides, but we're not doing it the way it could be if we were focused on one area. And that's not to cast aspersions. You got to do what you got to do. But that's, I think, where we're focusing. Can we do this in a better way that increases that fund so we don't have to, out of necessity, have these concerns where who's advocating for who?
Mr. Rose, take us home.
Honorable Mayor, the purpose for this meeting was so that twofold. One is that everyone at least understood the codes that govern the operation of the Loop Special Business District. And then secondly, and just as importantly, was to get an understanding of the direction that the mayor and council would like to see the Loop go. The next step will be to present you with a proposed budget to consider. A part of that budget, it sounds like there's an interest in seeing funding for a strategic plan. How will the annual plan be provided? And as a part of that annual plan or activities, a marketing plan that would be funded. And then secondly, I think that we will come back again and discuss the need for an executive director. Mayor, that concludes my report.
Okay, we will now move to the public's session. We'll probably take a little break as we